A gun aimed straight at my daughter's face. Someone yelled, "Freeze!" and my blood ran cold. The man holding the weapon wasn't a criminal. It was our own HOA security guard. His reason? My daughter looked suspicious, returning home at 10 p.m. What he didn't know was that she's an FBI tactical commander who's led some of the country's most dangerous raids over the past 5 years. And that night was just the beginning of his downfall. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and follow along as I tell you how one arrogant HOA guard picked a fight with the wrong family. My name is Michael Johnson, a 58-year-old retired diplomatic officer who spent 3 decades navigating the world's political minefields. I thought I'd seen everything, until I moved to Lakeside Pines, an upscale gated community in Connecticut that promised peace, security, and luxury. What the brochure didn't mention was the dictatorship behind its homeowners association. After my wife passed away 5 years ago, I wanted somewhere quiet and beautiful to settle down. Lakeside Pines looked perfect, neat lawns, a shining lake, and tight security. I had no idea that tight security would soon turn into a nightmare. My daughter Amy, 26, chose a very different path from me. After graduating top of her class at Quantico, she quickly rose through the FBI ranks, becoming a tactical commander specializing in high-risk operations. I couldn't be prouder, even if I rarely saw her because of her classified work. When she called saying she'd be home for a few weeks of rest after a 2-year counterterrorism mission, I was thrilled. We'd only been in Lakeside Pines for 3 months, and I couldn't wait to show her our new home. The HOA was ruled by Robert Thompson, a 58-year-old ex-executive with a God complex, and his wife Sarah, who treated the neighborhood like their private kingdom. From day one, I clashed with their absurd rules, everything from the exact shade of white for window blinds to the days you could water your lawn. Enforcing those rules was Curtis Wilson, a 42-year-old ex-cop fired for excessive force, now head of HOA security. He roamed the streets like a wannabe warlord with his crew of 4. The incident happened one Friday night in July. Amy's flight was delayed, and she reached home around 10 p.m. I'd given her a key and gate code but forgot to alert security, a small oversight that turned explosive. As I waited inside, I heard raised voices outside. Opening the door, I froze. Curtis Wilson had his gun aimed directly at my daughter, while his partner hovered with his hand on his holster. "I don't care what ID you're showing," Curtis barked. "You don't have resident clearance. Get on the ground or you'll be treated as a threat." The porch light cast sharp shadows as neighbors peeked through curtains. Amy stood calm, hands visible, reading the situation instantly. She recognized the weapon, a Glock 19, and knew he likely didn't even have a valid license to carry it. "Curtis, what the hell are you doing?" I yelled, stepping forward. "That's my daughter." Amy subtly shifted her stance to block me from danger. Curtis hesitated, drunk on authority. "Your daughter should have checked in," he sneered, finally lowering his gun. "We have protocols, Mr. Johnson. No exceptions, even for supposed FBI agents." Amy's voice was steady and controlled. "Mr. Wilson, pointing a firearm at a federal officer without cause is a felony. And I doubt your license to carry that weapon as private security in this state." Curtis's color drained, though his arrogance held. "This is private property. Different rules apply here," he muttered before retreating. I ushered Amy inside, my hands still shaking. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That was completely out of line." "It's okay, Dad," she said calmly. "But we'll need a plan. That man's dangerous, not because he's skilled, but because he's insecure and armed. That's always trouble." As we sat in the kitchen, tea growing cold between us, Amy began asking sharp questions about the HOA and Curtis Wilson. Her mind was already working, connecting dots I hadn't even noticed. Sometimes the most interesting cases aren't the big terrorist plots or high-profile heists. It's the small-town tyrants who abuse their tiny kingdoms that truly deserve attention. I laughed when Amy said that, unaware how true it would soon become. The next morning, a sharp knock echoed at the door. Robert Thompson stood there, polished in khakis and a Lakeside Pines polo, silver hair perfectly styled, his expression a blend of fake concern and quiet disdain. His wife, Sarah, hovered behind him, dressed like she was headed to a country club instead of a confrontation. Robert held a formal letter in his hand. "Mr. Johnson, he began smoothly, not waiting to be invited inside. "We need to discuss last night's unfortunate incident." "Unfortunate," I repeated, trying to keep my temper. "Your security guard aimed a loaded weapon at my daughter for coming home late." "That's not unfortunate, it's criminal." Robert's smile tightened. "Our team was following protocol. Had you properly registered your guest—" "My daughter," I interrupted sharply. "Not a guest. And no protocol justifies pulling a gun on someone with valid ID." Amy stepped beside me, calm but alert. "Mr. Thompson," she said evenly, "I understand the importance of security, but are all your guards properly licensed for armed work in this state? I noticed a few irregularities last night." Her tone was polite, but I recognized the quiet pressure of an interrogation. Robert's smile faltered before he forced it back into place. "All our staff meet the highest standards, Miss Johnson. Now, if you'll accept this formal warning, we can move on." Amy didn't even reach for the envelope. "I don't think we'll be accepting that," she said pleasantly, closing the door with calm finality. Through the window, I saw Robert and Sarah retreat down the walkway, Sarah already gesturing animatedly, no doubt preparing her gossip version of the event. "That was satisfying," I admitted. "But maybe not the most diplomatic move." Amy smiled faintly. "Sometimes you have to set boundaries before real negotiations begin. And trust me, Dad, we're in negotiations now." Later that day, we met Linda Peterson, a retired teacher who lived 3 doors down. She brought over a belated welcome pie and, over tea, revealed a quieter rebellion brewing in the neighborhood. "Robert and Sarah have ruled this place like royalty for 5 years," she said. "Anyone who questions them gets flooded with violation letters or cut off from events. Most folks just pay up and stay silent." Amy listened closely, asking pointed but friendly questions, already mapping the power structure in her mind. Over the next few days, she studied the HOA bylaws and found multiple clauses that wouldn't survive legal scrutiny. Meanwhile, Curtis Wilson began parking his patrol car across from our house for hours, a not-so-subtle intimidation tactic that only made Amy more focused. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. And Linda mentioned that Sarah was hosting a ladies' tea, conveniently leaving me, the only single father, off the invite list. Amy spent long hours on her laptop, occasionally making quiet phone calls. When I asked what she was digging into, she showed me what she'd found. Curtis had been fired from the police force for excessive force, and Robert personally helped him land the HOA job. Stranger still, Curtis was being paid far more than his position warranted. "There's something off about their finances," Amy murmured, scrolling through records. "The HOA fees here are among the highest in the state, but the spending doesn't match." Things escalated when Amy ran into Sarah Thompson at the local grocery store. I wasn't there, but Amy later described how Sarah accidentally rammed her cart into hers. "Oh, it's the FBI agent," Sarah said loudly. "I hope you're not investigating our grocery store. We're all law-abiding citizens here. Well, most of us." Amy simply smiled. "Actually, financial crimes are my specialty. You'd be surprised what people try to hide in plain sight." Sarah went pale and hurried off, watched closely by a woman in a professional suit who had overheard everything. That woman, Amy would soon discover, was Jessica Miller, a 40-year-old attorney serving on the HOA board. Jessica Miller, a 40-year-old attorney on the HOA board, had grown increasingly uneasy with Robert's leadership. She approached Amy in the parking lot one afternoon, introducing herself quietly. "There are things happening in Lakeside Pines that don't add up," she said. "Financial discrepancies, shady contracts, selective rule enforcement. Some of us have been gathering evidence, but we need someone who knows how to use it." When Amy told me about the conversation that evening, I recognized the spark in her eyes, the same look she had as a kid when she'd found a mystery worth solving. "Sometimes, Dad," she said with a sly smile, "you have to let your enemies think they're winning before you turn the tables." A week later came the annual HOA meeting, a perfect stage to witness the Thompson regime in all its arrogance. The community center looked like a miniature courtroom, with Robert and Sarah seated at an elevated table, flanked by Curtis Wilson and Treasurer David Clark, a nervous accountant who nodded at every word Robert uttered. Amy and I were assigned seats in the back row, a petty attempt to sideline us, though it gave her the ideal vantage point to observe everything. In the days leading up to the meeting, Amy had quietly built connections with residents like Jessica, those tired of the Thompsons' control. She'd also reached out to a friend from her FBI days, Officer James Rodriguez, now serving with local law enforcement. The meeting unfolded predictably. Robert boasted about rising property values. Sarah chirped through social announcements I doubted we'd be invited to. Then David delivered a vague financial report that sounded more like fiction than accounting. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. I noticed security expenses are up 30% this year, yet there's no itemized breakdown. Could we get one? The room went silent. Robert's smile stiffened. Security is our top priority, Mr. Johnson. The board has approved all expenditures. I understand, I replied calmly, but as paying residents, don't we have a right to know where our money's going? Robert's jaw clenched. Detailed financials are for board members only. For security reasons. That's when Jessica spoke up. Actually, I'm on the board, she said evenly, and I haven't seen those itemized expenses either. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Robert shot her a look that could cut glass. Curtis stepped closer to me, his stance deliberately intimidating. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Moments later, Robert rushed through the rest of the agenda and abruptly adjourned the meeting. As people shuffled out, Sarah cornered Jessica near the refreshment table, their voices sharp. Meanwhile, Curtis and another guard positioned themselves near the exit, watching Amy and me like hawks. Let them make the next move, Amy whispered as we headed for our car. They're rattled, and that's when people make mistakes. Sure enough, as we tried to leave, a security vehicle blocked our path. Curtis approached, smug as ever. Sir, your car's parked at an angle exceeding the 15-degree limit, he said. It was such a ridiculous excuse that I nearly laughed, but Amy placed a steady hand on my arm. Officer Wilson, she said evenly, you're mistaken, and by blocking our exit, you're committing a traffic violation. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Officer Rodriguez? It's Amy Johnson. We've got a security guard here obstructing our vehicle and fabricating violations. Could you send a unit over? Curtis's face drained of color. He stammered, signaling his partner to move the car. There seems to have been a misunderstanding, he muttered, stepping back. As we drove off, I caught sight of Robert and Sarah on the steps, their expressions dark, tinged with something new, uncertainty. That won't make us any friends, I said dryly. We don't need friends, Amy replied. We need respect. And sometimes, respect comes after you show strength. Back home, Amy laid out her latest findings. Curtis isn't just a washed-up ex-cop with an ego, she said. He's part of something bigger. With Jessica's help, she'd uncovered disturbing details. The security company employing Curtis was registered to Robert's brother-in-law, and it was billing the HOA inflated rates for minimal service. She opened a folder filled with records. According to these, over $300,000 in community funds are missing. Money supposedly spent on infrastructure improvements that don't exist. I scanned the documents, my diplomatic instincts kicking in. This looks like a textbook embezzlement scheme, I said, impressed despite myself. But why risk so much for such relatively small amounts? Robert didn't seem short on money. Amy gave a grim smile. It's rarely about need, Dad. It's about entitlement. People like Robert and Sarah think rules don't apply to them. The money's just part of the power trip. She pointed to another document showing property records. Robert owns 3 homes here through shell companies. Funny how they never get violation notices, despite clear infractions. As we discussed strategy, Amy's phone buzzed, a text from Jessica. Board emergency meeting tomorrow. Are pushing new bylaw amendments. Need to talk. Amy showed me the message, her jaw set. They're speeding up. So should we. She made a quick call, her tone sharp and professional. Marcus, it's Amy. I need a financial consult, civilian matter, time sensitive. Can you be in Connecticut tomorrow? Great. I'll send details. She hung up and explained, Marcus Reed, top FBI financial crimes expert. He owes me a favor. With his help, we can verify the fraud and build a real case. I frowned. A case? Amy, This is a neighborhood dispute, not a federal crime. Her gaze hardened. Dad, when people abuse power for personal gain, that is a federal matter. And nobody points a gun at me and walks away. The Thompsons struck back the next morning. We got 5 HOA violation notices, each more absurd than the last. Our trash bin was 2 inches out of place, the porch light too warm, the flag improperly lit. Curtis's crew parked outside for hours, taking photos. When I tried to use the pool, I was told my privileges were suspended. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street to avoid us. Through it all, Amy stayed calm, even amused. Classic intimidation tactics, she said, holding another stack of notices. They want us to give up or move. Wrong targets. If anything, their harassment only fueled my resolve. I'd faced dictators in my diplomatic career. Robert Thompson's petty tyranny was nothing in comparison. Marcus arrived the next day, focused, methodical, and sharp. He spent 2 days analyzing Jessica's documents, occasionally whistling at what he found. If this is accurate, he said, you're looking at serious financial violations. The security contracts self-dealing, and the fake infrastructure projects scream embezzlement. Meanwhile, Amy had discreet cameras installed around the property. Just documenting, she said when I raised a brow. Evidence wins cases. Her foresight paid off 3 nights later when the footage caught Curtis and 2 guards sneaking into our yard at 3 a.m., measuring grass height with flashlights and photographing everything. Then came Linda Peterson, crying on our doorstep. Sarah Thompson had threatened to ban her grandkids from visiting if she stayed friends with us. I'm so sorry, she said. I can't risk losing them. Amy's voice softened. You have nothing to apologize for. The Thompsons use fear to control people, but not for much longer. That evening, we saw unusual activity at the Thompsons. David Clark arrived after dark with folders, followed by Curtis. They argued for 2 hours behind drawn curtains. Amy watched from the window. They're panicking, she said. Jessica's questions rattled them. She fired off a few texts, then turned to me. Time for the next phase. The following morning, Curtis arrived with 2 guards, smug and ready. Mandatory security inspection, he declared, trying to push past me. I blocked the doorway, anger flaring. You have no authority to enter my home without permission or a warrant. Curtis smirked and held up a paper. HOA Bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 3. Property inspections are allowed upon reasonable suspicion of bylaw violations, Curtis declared smugly. We've documented 27 this week alone. Amy stepped beside me, phone raised and recording. That clause contradicts state property law, she said evenly. And speaking of documentation, care to explain why you were in our yard at 3 a.m. 2 nights ago? Curtis's confidence faltered before hardening again. You're interfering with HOA security operations. There will be consequences. As they walked off, one guard glanced back uneasily, clearly uncomfortable. That night, our cameras caught Curtis and the same guard returning after midnight. This time, they vandalized our garden, tearing up plants and spray painting an obscene message on our fence. I was furious, ready to confront them, but Amy stopped me with a steady hand. This is exactly what we need, she said, eyes gleaming. They're slipping. Every mistake makes our case stronger. She made a brief call. It's time, she said simply. We need support for the next phase. Then, turning to me with a confident smile, you always said timing is everything in diplomacy. Let's show these bullies what happens when they mistake patience for weakness. The weekend brought an unexpected sight. Neighbors gathered on our lawn with tools, helping repair the damage. Jessica Miller had organized it, uniting residents who'd endured similar harassment but had been too afraid to speak. As they worked, stories flowed, selective enforcement, bogus fines, and Sarah's social blacklisting of dissenters. What began as garden repair was turning into something bigger, a community finding its courage. Among the volunteers was Marcus Reed, introduced simply as Amy's colleague. His presence proved useful when Curtis drove by, slowly filming us. Is that the guard? Marcus asked, eyes narrowing as he noted Curtis's stance, and the bulge under his jacket. When Amy nodded, Marcus quietly stepped away to make a call. 20 minutes later, Officer James Rodriguez pulled up in his patrol car, and Curtis vanished down the street. Inside, James shared what he'd uncovered. Curtis Wilson's file is a disaster: excessive force complaints, 2 suspicious shootings, and a domestic violence report that disappeared. He was quietly forced out of the department. And his carry license expired last year. Psychological concerns prevented renewal. While the neighbors represented our visible stand, the real battle unfolded inside. Amy, Marcus, Jessica, and James were compiling a full case. Jessica had been copying HOA records for months, documenting fake expenses. Marcus traced shell companies tied to Robert and Sarah, showing inflated contracts and missing funds. James uncovered police reports proving Curtis used officers to target critics while protecting allies. Marcus pointed to a chart spread across the table. The security firm Curtis works for is registered to Sarah's brother, no real office, no other clients. They get $150,000 a year but report only $60,000 in wages. The rest vanishes offshore. Jessica added, same pattern with landscaping, roadwork, and renovations, inflated payments, minimal work, and the money disappears. As everyone left that evening, Linda lingered. You were right, Amy, she said, voice firm. They can't ban my grandkids. That's not in the bylaws. I've been letting fear run my life. Not anymore. Amy smiled. Exactly. Their power only exists because people believe in it. Once that belief cracks, she didn't finish, but none of us needed her to. The Thompsons' control was built on intimidation, not legitimacy, and that foundation was starting to crumble. The next day, the unexpected happened. Robert and Sarah Thompson showed up at our door, wearing strained smiles. Michael, Robert began, feigning diplomacy, we think this situation's gotten out of hand. We'd like to propose a resolution. He handed me a document titled Mutual Non-Disclosure and Non-Litigation Agreement. Sarah nodded eagerly beside him. We're all neighbors after all, Robert said with forced warmth. No need for unpleasantness. I invited them in with diplomatic courtesy, noting how Sarah's eyes darted around, scanning for potential violations. Amy skimmed the document with surgical focus, her brows lifting at several outrageous clauses. Interesting, she said finally. So you'll stop issuing violation notices if we agree never to question HOA finances or pursue legal action against the board. She set the paper down, tone polite but sharp. What inspired this sudden goodwill? Robert shifted uncomfortably. As Sarah said, we all benefit from harmony. Harmony under your control, I replied dryly. Amy gave me a warning glance, staying composed. Sarah's smile tightened. We've been patient, Mr. Johnson. Not everyone is suited for community living. Perhaps, Amy cut in smoothly, but true harmony requires fairness and transparency, neither of which this agreement offers. She handed it back. We'll have to decline. Robert's charm cracked, anger flickering through. You're making a mistake. There are consequences for defying the board. As they turned to leave, Amy called after them, her voice calm but cutting. Oh, Robert, this conversation's been recorded. Threats against homeowners could be considered harassment under state law. The door shut on their stunned faces. I looked at Amy, admiring her precision. What's next? Her smile held that spark of strategy I'd seen before. A press conference, Dad. And you'll be our spokesperson. The emergency HOA meeting that followed was meant to cement Robert's control with new bylaws. The room was tense, packed with uneasy residents. Robert sat at the head table with Sarah, David, and Curtis, their expressions a mix of arrogance and fear. They had reason to worry. Amy had orchestrated everything perfectly. Officer Rodriguez, Agent Marcus Reed, and a local reporter were all in attendance, scattered among the crowd. Robert opened with his usual self-congratulatory speech about community standards and property values, taking thinly veiled jabs at us. When he moved to introduce a bylaw granting security unrestricted access to homes, I raised my hand. Point of order, I said. Before we expand board powers, residents deserve to know how the current ones have been used. Murmurs rippled through the audience as I walked to the front. I've reviewed the HOA financials, records that should be public but mysteriously aren't. Robert tried to interrupt, but Jessica quickly cited the bylaws to protect my right to speak. The next 30 minutes were the most satisfying of my post-diplomatic life. With steady composure, I laid out our findings. The security company, receiving $150,000 annually, is owned by Sarah Thompson's brother, employing unlicensed guards, one of whom, Mr. Wilson, was filmed threatening residents with an illegal firearm. The landscaping contract went to Robert's college roommate's firm, at 60% above market value, for almost no work. As I spoke, Jessica passed out packets of emails, invoices, and photographs exposing the fraud. Robert's face reddened. Sarah whispered furiously to David, who looked like he might faint. And most troubling, I continued, over $300,000 collected for community improvements has vanished. No records, no projects. I think we deserve an explanation before granting more authority to those responsible. Curtis began moving toward me, but Officer Rodriguez intercepted him with quiet authority. Robert shot to his feet, voice trembling with rage. These accusations are baseless, libelous. This meeting is adjourned. But the crowd erupted. Dozens of residents stood, shouting questions, demanding transparency. The records speak for themselves, I said calmly. If there's an innocent explanation, we're all eager to hear it. That's when David, pale and sweating, finally cracked. I just processed the payments Robert told me to. I just processed the paperwork Robert gave me, David stammered. I didn't know about the shell companies. Sarah gasped, horrified, while Robert lunged to pull David away from the microphone. The reporter scribbled furiously as Agent Marcus Reed subtly moved toward the exit, anticipating what was next. Realizing his control was slipping, Robert switched tactics. This is a private HOA matter being blown out of proportion, he said tightly. Mr. Johnson clearly has a personal vendetta after his daughter was questioned by security. Amy, who had stayed quietly in the back, stepped forward, calm but fierce. Then let's show everyone what that questioning looked like. She connected her phone to the projector, and the footage appeared, Curtis pointing a gun at her, then his team vandalizing our property under cover of darkness. Gasps filled the room. Sarah groaned audibly. Before anyone could process what they'd seen, Curtis snapped. Enraged by his public humiliation, he lunged at me, hand reaching for his concealed weapon. Screams erupted. But Amy moved before anyone else, swift and precise. In seconds, Curtis was face down, one arm twisted behind him, his own cuffs securing his wrist. Officer Rodriguez stepped in immediately, arresting him for assault, illegal possession of a firearm, and criminal threats. As Curtis was dragged out, cursing and struggling, Robert bolted for the exit, only to be met by Marcus Reed, flashing his badge. Robert Thompson, he said. FBI. We need to talk about the offshore transfers from Lakeside Pines HOA accounts. The room went silent, then erupted into chaotic chatter as Robert was led away. Jessica quickly regained control, using her legal composure to calm the crowd and appoint an interim committee until proper elections could be held. Sarah fled in tears, abandoned by her husband and reputation alike. David, pale but relieved, surrendered all financial records to Rodriguez, hoping for leniency. When the community center finally emptied, Amy and I walked home under the soft evening light. Was all this really necessary? I asked. Couldn't we have just reported Curtis that first night? Amy considered. We could have, but that would have treated the symptom, not the disease. This wasn't just one bad guard. It was a system built on intimidation and corruption. She smiled faintly. I'm trained to dismantle those properly. A reporter caught up as we reached our house. Who exactly are you, Ms. Johnson? She asked, pen ready. Amy smiled. Just a homeowner who knows her rights, she said, closing the door behind us. 3 months later, Lakeside Pines was unrecognizable. Investigations led to multiple charges against Robert: embezzlement, fraud, financial misconduct. Curtis faced counts for weapons violations, assault, and harassment. What began as a local scandal soon drew regional headlines, embarrassing the former leadership but restoring integrity to the community. Sarah sold her house and left the state. David cooperated with investigators, detailing Robert's manipulation of HOA funds in exchange for leniency. The corrupt security firm was dissolved and replaced by a legitimate, licensed company. But the biggest transformation came from within. Jessica Miller was elected HOA president, with Linda Peterson as vice president. Their first actions, rewriting the bylaws for transparency, setting fair enforcement procedures, and cutting excessive fees. Community gatherings became genuine celebrations instead of social battlegrounds. Neighbors who once avoided each other now stopped to chat while walking dogs or collecting mail. One evening, as Amy and I sat on our porch watching children play freely, I realized something. The fight hadn't just reclaimed our homes, it had restored our sense of community. Just before sunset, on the eve of her departure for a new assignment, Sarah Thompson appeared at our gate. She looked nothing like the polished queen of Lakeside Pines, simple jeans, tired eyes, and humility replacing her usual poise. "May I speak with you?" she asked softly. I looked to Amy, who nodded and invited her in. Sarah declined the chair, standing awkwardly. "I wanted to apologize before I leave," she began. "I knew part of what Robert was doing, enough to know it was wrong. But I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone, that it was just how things worked." Amy regarded her evenly. "Why stay silent?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Because being Mrs. Robert Thompson was everything. I was nobody before him, a receptionist from a small town. The status, the respect, the envy. I got addicted. Now I'm starting over at 55 with nothing but regrets." I felt a flicker of pity, not for her choices, but for the fragile human need to feel important. After she left, Amy suggested an impromptu barbecue. We invited everyone, those who'd stood with us and those simply ready for a fresh start. As twilight settled, laughter and conversation filled the once patrolled lawns. Jessica pulled me aside, watching Amy talk with neighbors. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said. "I've learned more about leadership from her these past months than in my whole career. She never sought power, just fairness. The community will miss her." I smiled, pride and melancholy intertwining. Having a daughter like Amy meant accepting she'd always be called to where she was needed most. Later, after the guests had gone and silence returned, we sat on the porch with glasses of bourbon. "You could have handled Curtis that first night," I said. "Instead, you dismantled an entire system." "Why?" Amy turned her glass slowly. "Because you taught me that real diplomacy isn't avoiding conflict, it's transforming it. Curtis pulling that gun was just a symptom of something rotten. Taking him down alone wouldn't fix the disease." She looked out at the quiet streets, porch lights glowing like earthbound stars. "It wasn't about revenge, Dad. It was about restoration. Communities should protect, not fear, each other." In that moment, I understood. It wasn't only the tactical commander in her that led the charge, but the builder, the reformer I hadn't fully seen before. "I've spent years dismantling threats," she said softly. "But building something better afterward, that's the real victory." At dawn, we loaded her bags for the airport. A stack of thank you cards from neighbors sat by the door, people who'd once been strangers. "Will you be all right without me?" she asked. "What if another guard tries to play hero?" I laughed. "Your old man still knows a few diplomatic tricks." As we drove, I glanced back at our house, the same one that had once symbolized conflict, now standing as a sign of renewal. "You know," Amy said, watching the sunrise, "sometimes the greatest battles are won without firing a shot. When you understand the game your opponent's playing, and turn it to your advantage, that's true strategy." She smiled, golden light catching her face. "And sometimes the most peaceful communities are the ones that have survived the worst storms." Since then, whenever an HOA anywhere starts overreaching, the story of the FBI commander's daughter and her diplomatic father resurfaces as a quiet warning. Not all heroes wear capes. Some just know their rights, and refuse to be intimidated. And above all, never point a gun at someone when you don't know who they are. Especially if that someone happens to be an FBI tactical commander with a gift for justice and strategy.